All right, let's dive into one of history's most incredible turnarounds, the story of how Christianity went from a tiny, hunted faith to the absolute defining force of the Roman Empire. I mean, just stop and think about that question for a second. It is staggering. In a single lifetime, Christianity goes from a religion where its followers were being thrown to lions to being the one and only required faith of the most powerful empire on the planet. How in the world does a shift that massive happen so fast?
So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll see how Christians got their first taste of freedom. Then, we'll zoom in on the emperor at the center of it all, Constantine. After that, we'll look at the first great civil war of ideas inside the church, see how the state finally chose a winner, and then uncover the incredible story of how the losing ideas simply refused to die.
Okay, so our story kicks off not with some big, flashy revolution, but with something a lot more bureaucratic. It starts with a series of laws that began to undo centuries of really brutal persecution. And it all happens with breathtaking speed. In 311, the Emperor Galerius, who had been a vicious persecutor of Christians, basically throws in the towel. His Edict of Toleration is a stunning admission that, you know what, they just couldn't stamp this thing out. Then, just 2 years later, after Constantine's legendary victory at the Milvian Bridge, we get the Edict of Milan. And this is the game changer. It grants religious freedom to everyone everywhere. The persecutions were over.
Now, this is a really important point, and a common mistake people make. The Edict of Milan didn't make Christianity the official state religion, not even close. All it did was make it legal to be a Christian. Constantine's goal here wasn't a Christian empire, it was a stable empire. The rest, well, that comes much later.
And that brings us to the man at the absolute center of this storm, Constantine the Great. For nearly 1,700 years, people have been arguing about him. Was his conversion a true, profound moment of faith? Or was it one of the most brilliant political moves in history? The evidence, well, it points in both directions.
Look, you can paint two totally different portraits of this guy, and you'd be right both times. On one hand, the shrewd politician held on to his pagan title Pontifex Maximus, the high priest. His early coins, they still honored the sun god. But on the other hand, the devout believer said he saw a vision of the cross. He poured a fortune into building massive churches, and he even called the first ever global council of the church to settle its doctrine. The man was a walking contradiction.
And this is the story that changes everything. The legend goes that on the eve of the battle that would give him control of the Western Empire, Constantine looked at the sky and saw a cross of light with these words. He had his soldiers paint the Christian Chiros symbol on their shields, and against all odds, he won. For his followers, it was undeniable proof that the Christian God was on his side.
But then, there's the other side, the side that just shatters that saintly image. To secure his own power, Constantine had his own wife killed. He had his own firstborn son executed. He even had his young nephew put to death. These weren't accidents. These were cold, hard, political calculations that are almost impossible to reconcile with the teachings of Jesus.
And if you want the ultimate twist, the perfect symbol of how messy this all was, get this. After spending a huge amount of political capital trying to crush a specific Christian belief, a heresy we're about to talk about, who does Constantine choose to baptize him on his deathbed? An Arian bishop, a leader of the very group he tried to destroy. It's an absolutely stunning piece of historical irony.
So with Christianity now free and even favored by the emperor, its first massive internal fight just explodes into the open. This wasn't a war fought with swords and shields, but with theology and philosophy, a battle for the very soul of Christianity itself.
At the heart of all this chaos was a belief called Arianism. The priest Arius basically argued for a clear hierarchy in the Trinity. God the Father, he said, was the ultimate uncreated creator. The Son, Jesus, was his first and most perfect creation, but still a creation. This meant Jesus was subordinate to the Father, not co-equal with him.
This table really lays it all out. The other side, which would become the Orthodox position, came up with a Nicene Creed. Their key idea was that the Son is consubstantial with the Father, meaning of the exact same stuff, the same substance. They were co-equal, co-eternal. To them, the Arian idea of a created Son was a dangerous heresy that threatened the very divinity of Christ.
Constantine, the ultimate politician, he looks at this theological mess and just sees instability for his empire. So he does what an emperor does. He calls a meeting.
he summons bishops from all over the world to Nicaea to sort it out. They hammer out the Nicene Creed, officially condemn Arianism, and kick out its main supporters. Problem solved, right?
Yeah, not even close. The ink on the creed was barely dry before things started to unravel. The exiled Arian bishops managed to get back into the emperor's good graces. They were pardoned, and the idea kept spreading. In fact, Constantine's own son and successor, Constantius II, was a full-blown Arian who used his imperial power to promote it. The division was now deeper than ever.
So for decades, this theological civil war just tears through the empire. Whichever side the current emperor favored had the upper hand. This constant chaotic back and forth eventually pushed a later emperor to make a final, brutal decision, to move from just favoring one religion to enforcing it with the full power of the state.
I mean, just look at this religious whiplash. For 50 years after Constantine, the official religion of the Roman Empire was swinging like a pendulum. You have a pro-Arian emperor, followed by a shocking, short-lived attempt to bring back paganism under Julian the Apostate. Then it's back to a pro-Arian emperor, until finally, Theodosius I, a die-hard Nicene Christian, takes the throne, and he decides he's going to end this debate for good.
And he does it with this, the Edict of Thessalonica. The language is just chilling. It doesn't just disagree, it condemns. It commands every Roman citizen to follow the Nicene faith. And anyone who doesn't, they are branded demented and insane and called heretics. The era of tolerance that Constantine had started was slammed shut.
And Theodosius wasn't just writing things down, he was actively erasing the past. Pagan temples were closed, their rituals banned. Traditions that had stood for 1,000 years, like the sacred flame in the Temple of Vesta, were snuffed out. Even the Olympic Games were canceled because of their pagan roots. At the same time, the state-backed church was solidifying its power, formally deciding which books would make it into the Bible. This was it, the creation of a unified, state-enforced Christendom.
So you'd think that would be the end of the story, right? Arianism was outlawed, condemned, and hunted by the most powerful empire in the world. It should have just faded away. But it didn't. In one of history's greatest plot twists, the heresy didn't die. It just moved house.
See, here's the thing they didn't count on. Before the big crackdown, while the debate was still hot, Arian missionaries had been incredibly busy. A bishop named Ulfilas, for example, had gone out beyond the borders of the empire and converted huge Germanic tribes, especially the Goths, to his version of Christianity, the Arian version. These were the very people who would eventually overrun the Western Empire.
And this number is just mind-blowing. 209 years. That's how long Arianism survived as the state religion of the Visigothic kingdom in Spain, more than 2 full centuries after it was made illegal in the Roman Empire. It only ended when a Visigothic king finally converted to Nicene Christianity in 589 AD.
So what this all means is that a theological debate that started in Alexandria, Egypt, became one of the key geopolitical fault lines of the early Middle Ages. The fall of Rome wasn't just a political collapse, it was a clash of cultures defined in large part by 2 different versions of Christianity, the Arian Goth versus the Catholic Roman.
Which leaves us with this big, final question to think about. This whole journey, from the catacombs to the throne room, it created Western civilization as we know it. It brought a kind of unity and power. But in merging the cross with the imperial eagle, in tying faith so tightly to state power, you have to wonder, what was gained and what might have been lost along the way?